Throughout this series of videos, I've been showing you some DBT commands, but now it's time that we talk about all of them and also talk about some of the most common flags that you might want to use. The first command that I show you during this series of videos is dbt init, which is short for initialized. This one is the one that builds a DBT project. You only need to run it once at the very beginning, and this will create all of the directory structure that you might need for a DBT project. So folders like models, seeds, snapshots, tests, analysis, all of that gets automatically created. The next one is dbt debug. This one I can actually run it. What it does is it checks your profiles.yaml and sees if it's a valid connection to whatever database you're working with, which in this case is my local DB, and it tells me that all of the checks have passed. Really good to debug at the beginning. There are some others that are specific to features. For example, dbt seeds, seed, singular. This one simply ingests all of the CSVs that are in your seeds folder. And you see here, they get loaded. There is dbt snapshot, which I'm not using any snapshots, but this one is one of the feature specific ones. There is dbt source freshness. This one, if you ever specify source freshness for any of your data sources, this is the moment that dbt is going to find out if your data is stale or not. There is dbt docs generate. That generates an artifact called a catalog.json, which is the one that gets served to build the dbt documentation as a website. I could also do dbt docs serve if I wanted to browse that website in my local environment. Please note that if you're on dbt cloud, you don't need to worry about dbt docs serve. This is something that dbt cloud does automatically for you. And even docs generate is just a checklist that happens before every deployment. You decide if you want to actually do it manually or every time a deployment is made that a new artifact gets created. For people using dbt core, actually finding a nice scalable way to host this website is one of the things that you need to take care of. Another interesting one is dbt clean, which for that one I need to show you here under my dbt project. There is, yes, this part here that says clean targets, both targets and dbt packages. So for example here, we're going to talk about targets more in a second. If I were to run this, it automatically gets rid of whatever it is that I want there. Packages and target are good defaults, but if you want dbt to get rid of something else whenever you do dbt clean, you can just simply add it to your project.yaml. Since we deleted here my packages, I need to reinstall them again, and that one is once again done with dbt deps, short for dependency. Another interesting command is dbt compile. And it might seem that it's not doing anything, but what this does is it takes all of your dbt models. Now remember that you're using things like Jinja and quite a lot of ref and source brackets, and it's simply here under the target directory, under a subdirectory called compiled, it simply places all of the code that is actually sent directly to your database. So what you see here, these files, these ones are the ones that are sent directly with, these ones don't have any Jinja in them. The reason why you might want to do a dbt compile every now and then is because this is able to spot errors with your Jinja much quicker than a dbt build, and even better, 100% for free. Now let's talk about the top 3 or top 4 most important dbt commands that you're probably going to do a lot more often. The first one is dbt run. What this does is it takes every single model in your dbt project and it materializes it. By default, it will be as a view. As you can see, some of them here are views. But if you specify it as a table or as an incremental table or ephemeral, it will do exactly just that. Now, this dbt project is quite large, so this is taking a bit longer than expected. But ultimately all of my models passed and they were built. The second important command is dbt test. What this does is it checks all of the tests in your dbt project, and this can be unit tests, generic tests, singular tests, whatever, and it runs them. In the end, it says that it finished 37 data tests. Everything went well, so that's good news. The next one is going to be probably the most important one, which is dbt build. Now, what dbt build does is actually quite a lot of things. So it is kind of a smart combination of a dbt run plus a dbt test plus a dbt seed, plus a dbt snapshots, and it also does UDFs, user defined functions, if you specified it, even though this is a relatively new feature. So it does all of these 5 commands, and it's smart enough to know, one, in which order they're supposed to be made, and if something is failing along the way, it simply stops at the right point. Let's give this a try. dbt build. This one might take, of course, a bit longer because it's not only building the models but also doing the test. And just know that dbt is smart enough to run them whenever, and if there will be somewhere a mistake along the way, some of the dependencies from wherever there was an error are gonna get skipped. So that's not unnecessary compute that gets wasted. If for whatever reason your dbt build or dbt run failed, some people might actually type dbt build again, but that's not a very smart thing to do. Probably what you want to do is to type dbt retry. What this simply does is it takes from wherever it failed, and let me tell you, this is a big project, so if any of you following this don't have a big computer, I expect you that you might have to type dbt retry maybe up to a couple of times, but it just simply takes over from whenever. In this case, there's not going to be anything to do, and it continues building, so it's really nice for you not to waste any resources. Now that I've showed you some of the most common dbt commands, it's time that we also talk about flags, which are optional things that you can do to modify the behavior of certain commands. The first one, as always, of course, is dbt help. This one just simply gives you an overview of all of the possibilities. This is just a documentation. It's a very common thing in many packages. Just know that you can either type dbt -- help, or you can simply do -- and then h. This gives you exactly the same result. This is a very common thing that you're gonna see across many other commands. The next one is dbt version, which just tells you which version of dbt you have installed. Once again, you could simply do there's an update available. You can simply do dbt-b, but it's a bit less clear for all of you watching. The next flag is dbt run full refresh. What this does is, if there is an incremental model in your dbt project, instead of adding data incrementally, it's going to simply drop the whole thing and upload the data once again from scratch. This is very useful whenever the underlying data has changed. So maybe somebody has modified a historical record, or when your table has duplicates or something. Generally, when you're working with incremental models, it's a very common thing that people still do a full refresh, maybe once a month or something, just to account for these historical changes. Now, this is taking quite a bit, but it ultimately worked. Another one that I really like is, I forgot the command, fail fast. This one runs a bit more strict version of dbt that it also considers things like warnings, and it just simply fails. Especially when you're testing that your project is correct, this is an option that you might want to add just in case. It's better to be more strict and things to fail than to be a bit more permissive and then have errors that you were not expecting. Another very important one is the target, or of course, as you can already imagine, -t. By default, every single thing that we do, let's do for example a test, that one takes 2 seconds. What you might notice is, yes, by default the target is def. But what if I told you that it's actually possible to overwrite that behavior? So instead of that, I could maybe do something like target equal prod. Now this command is gonna run, yeah, here it is, on prod. You can do exactly the same with dbt build, dbt run, dbt test, snapshots. All of the commands, they run in a target by default. Now it is a good practice for you, the developer, to have everything run in deb, and for a production run to run once with the target of prod. But if for whatever reason you want to test it, you know that you can change the target. Now this one is gonna take maybe a bit longer. Let's see, yeah, we can cancel it. Keyword interrupt, not a big issue. Another really interesting one is select, which is once again -s if you prefer to do it a bit short. Select has quite a lot of options. You can either specify one particular model, like for example, let's look. Sure. Let's do staging green trip data. You don't need to specify .sql, just simply the name. And what this does is it would simply run that one model, and that's it. Nothing else gets run. There are some interesting options that happen here, and that is, but what if you also need to build the downstream or upstream dependencies? Well, you can actually do it by adding a plus sign. So for example, I can do here dbt run, select, and let's do the trips unions. This one, if you remember, depends on both sources. So it depends on both staging models, in green and in yellow staging models. What I can do here is, yeah, let's close it. If I try to run this, it's gonna run only exclusively that model, and this is fully fine, I guess. It might take a second or two. But look at what happens if I add a plus sign here at the beginning. Now it also built the staging models. So this plus sign is essentially telling dbt build everything that you need to build this. Everything that is depending on this one, do it. Once again, we could do exactly the same here with this plus sign. So this says start building from int trips unions and anything else that is also needed afterwards, which in this case is going to be a couple of very heavy models, the int trips and also the fact trips. Now it might take a bit too long, so I'm probably going to just cancel this, but you already get the drill. And of course, it is also possible to do everything that goes upstream and downstream dependencies with a double plus sign. dbt select allows you to select one model. It allows you to select a certain location. So for example, everything in my models intermediate, this is a possibility. You could also do everything that has a certain tag. So maybe, I don't know, tag, whatever it is that you have tagged it with. Select is quite flexible, and that's kind of nice because it allows you to only run whatever you want. There are a couple of options from select that are a bit more advanced, but I think it's interesting to tell you about them. Instead of selecting what you think has changed, you could potentially use state and either use new for files that you just created or modify for anything that has changed. The kick here is that if you're on DBT Cloud, this works exactly like this, nothing too crazy. But if you're on DBT Core, you're going to have to do one extra thing. That is, every time that you do something with DBT, you get some artifacts, which are these JSON files. Manifest.json is probably the most important one. This one contains information of everything that happens with your DBT run. These are the files that DBT compares to determine if something has been modified. What you actually need to do, if you plan to do this on DBT Core, is to make a copy of these files and put them somewhere else. Which, being honest, is also a really good practice to make backups or ingest all of these JSONs into a bucket. It allows you to analyze how your DBT project is growing and so on. And then once you have them, you need to type state and point at whatever location they are at. So maybe they're somewhere called DBT prod artifacts or whatever. If you try to do it like this on target, which is where they are right now, DBT is going to give you a warning and it's not going to process it. Just because it's dangerous to modify, this could lead to misleading changes due to overwritten state. So just make sure that if you're gonna try to do this, then just simply make sure that you ingest these artifacts somewhere safe.